How's it going, viewers? Welcome back to another video. The first video in I think like a week because I've been terrible, I've been working, I've been doing all that good stuff, so I haven't made a video in a while, but we're back. It's Japanese Grand Prix weekend review time. Gonna be looking back on the predictions I made, the race, what happened in the race. There's a lot to talk about. I think a few sort of hot topics of debate which we're going to cover. We're going to do a brief skim over of qualifying, although it wasn't that eventful, it's still worth talking about, and we're going to get straight into it. This is going to be the last review video, I think, for the next month, because Bahrain and Saudi got cancelled, and Miami isn't until the 3rd of May. So this is going to be the last F1 related video, chat video for a great period of time. So hopefully we'll all enjoy. I've got a few questions as well, but let's get straight into it. Okie dokie, so we're going to get started with qualifying. As always, I think we know the drill by now. Qualifying is first up, and I guess the only big talking point of qualifying is Max Verstappen getting knocked out in Q2 by Arvid Lindblad and being out qualified by Gasly and his own teammate Isaac Hadjar. Now, obviously, Verstappen hasn't had the best start to the season. It's been quite... I mean, I guess you would say poor is the word for it, you know, considering this is a four-time champion who we're talking about, who is struggling to make it out of Q2, which this is now 3 weekends in a row. Australia, you may or may not count that because it was a crash, and from what we understand, it was a car issue which caused that crash. So that one is hard to judge on whether he would have made it into Q3 or not. China is an obvious one. There was no pace. Whether there were whether there was no pace in the car, or whether Max had no pace, we don't know. But there was no car issue in China during qualifying, so that one can definitely go against his record. And then obviously Japan, which is now 3 weekends in a row that Verstappen has not qualified inside the top 7, which is crazy to say. I did not think we'd be saying that at the end of last year, although I was someone who at the end of last year was very much dying on the hill of that Ford engine wasn't going to be any good, and by the looks of things it really isn't. Obviously Mercedes has the best engine. I think everyone can agree on that. Ferrari probably a close second. But one could say the Audi engine is better than the Ford. Obviously, the Honda engine is a stone dead last. Like, that's pretty fair given. But I would certainly argue that the Ford engine is definitively worse than the Audi, both in reliability and in performance, crucially in performance. And, like, this is the thing with when you have a driver on the level of Max Verstappen, who is in a car which is not capable of what we would expect to see from someone of Max's caliber, it becomes very hard to judge what is and what isn't a good performance, if you understand what I mean. And it's kind of along the lines of, you know, you look at times in history when really good drivers have been in bad cars. You look at, for example, Fernando Alonso, McLaren Honda days. You look at, you know, David Coulthard in a very shit Red Bull in the late 2000s. Lewis Hamilton, 2022 to 2024. All that kind of stuff, you know, those types of situations where you've got good drivers in bad teams, and it becomes very hard to judge when they have a good race and when they're not. And the crucial thing about that is what you see. So we haven't seen much of Max lately in the last few streams and during qualifying and during the race, because he hasn't been fighting up the front, which you would normally see. So it becomes very hard to judge when Max is having a good and when he is having a bad performance. But I think definitely this weekend in Japan was one of those bad performances. You know, he's now, off the top of my head, 7th in the driver's standings. He's got to be doing better than that. A lot of Max fans would write home the point that, oh, you know, Max is in the 6th fastest car, the Red Bull is shit, all this kind of stuff. Yes, I agree that the Red Bull is bad. It is not the 6th fastest car. It is the 4th fastest car. The McLaren obviously better, Ferrari and Merc obviously better, but it is not as bad. Like, it is top of the midfield. It is in that league of top 4 teams because Max is still in that top 7, which we'll get onto later in the race. But you cannot really attribute him finishing 7th on the car. If he was finishing 16th, then maybe you could blame it on the car because it would probably be that bad. But the fact that he's still finishing 7th, he needs to be finishing higher, and the car really just isn't as bad as what people say it is. But it does mean that now, after Suzuka, Gasly, it is now 4-0 to Gasly in qualifying against Max Verstappen, and I believe it is 3-1 to Hajar in qualifying against Verstappen. That is including sprint races, because Max Verstappen out-qualified Isaac in the China sprint. But not a good start to the season for Max. They do have now a month to sort of regroup, fix up their issues, and get back after it. But I just don't see them turning this around, at least not in the next, month and a half. But that is pretty much all we're going to talk about for qualifying. It was really the only sort of important part. Obviously, Kimi Antonelli on pole, another good lap. Not much to say apart from he hooked it up nicely. Although there was one interesting, funny thing. So obviously when F1 have qualifying, they have the DHL Fastest Lap Award, or the DHL Pole Award, I believe it's actually called now, where they just post the onboard lap of the fastest time in qualifying. And then there was an interesting part during Antonelli's laps where they, quote, lost telemetry and live feed from Kimi's car, where basically going into 130R, it cut to the off-board shot, so the trackside shot, before then going back to the on-board cam just at the braking zone into the final chicane, which one could see as a technical issue. Well, someone who is very naive would see that as a technical issue, but anyone with a 33rd of a brain would be able to see that they were covering up the lifting going into 130R, which is immensely amusing, I think, to say the least. They know they fucked up with how much recharge is going on. Obviously, they tried to compensate it with dropping the limit to 8 kilojoules or watts or something. I don't remember the exact wording. I'm not very smart when it comes to that. But they did drop it by a little bit to try and reduce the amount of lifting and coasting and super clipping, crucially, especially going into 130R, but it did not work, and they tried to cover up their tracks by cutting to an off-track shot and blaming it on a technical problem with Kimi's transponder, but that failed miserably, and I just thought that was quite funny, just a little thing to mention. But we are going to move on to the race now. Okie dokie, so we're going to get into the race now, the most important part of the weekend, because that's where you get the points, obviously, Will Buxton moment. But we're going to start, obviously we do this in chronological order, but I think out of all the race starts we've had this season, this was probably the most important, because it gave us, I think, honestly the best indicator on who's good at starting, who isn't good at starting, and where everything falls into place. Obviously, we hadn't seen the McLarens. Well, we saw Norris start in Australia. We didn't see Oscar start in Australia, and we didn't see either of them start in China. So the McLaren was kind of in an unknown region of how they started, or sort of what we knew about them. But Japan, we finally got an answer to how the McLarens are off the line, and they are good. Obviously, all the rage was about how good the Ferrari was off the line and down into the first corner on any given track, and the Ferraris were quick today. It's like we saw that again. We saw it in China, we saw it in Australia. The Ferraris have always been quick. But if you look down, because of the image I've used for today's video, if you look down there is a certain McLaren in the lead of the Grand Prix. And honestly, after what we've seen today, it's just like considering how quickly Norris got off the start, and especially how quickly Oscar got off the start, the McLarens are honestly probably quicker than the Ferraris off the start. Obviously, Leclerc went from 5th to 2nd. Piastri went from 3rd to 1st, and Norris went from 4th to 3rd. So, take of that what you will, but I think after Ferrari were having the start monopoly, I guess you could say, more to the point that they had that monopoly because the McLarens weren't starting. But Ferrari do have to be genuinely concerned now, because the McLarens seem to be on par, if not better, off the grid than the Ferraris do. Which, creates a very interesting sort of power dynamic where obviously the Mercedes aren't good enough to keep the lead going into turn 1. The McLarens and the Ferraris are basically equal, so qualifying now more than ever is really crucial, because we were saying in Australia and China that as long as the Ferraris qualify on the second row of the grid, they should be leading by the entry point to turn 1. But now seeing this, you could easily say the same for McLaren. You look at that image below, Piastri had a gap of at least 40 meters before turn 1, and he started on the second row of the grid. So, Ferrari do have their work cut out for them now to remain or to retain that edge on start going into the rest of the season, because McLaren definitely seem to have it under control. But it leads me nicely into the first part of the race, which was the first stint before the safety car, and that was Piastri leading from Russell for majority of the race. And one could say that, if we see starts like that again, and Piastri is leading, he could go on to win a few races, because the first half of that race was very much a story of, can Russell keep up with Piastri? It wasn't actually a matter of, can Russell get past Piastri? But when I was watching, I was sitting there going, can he at least just stay close? Because that McLaren in clean air at the front of the field, controlling the pace of the race, was, to be honest, a force to be reckoned with. I was surprised at how well that McLaren was operating. Obviously, with Norris in Australia being our only reference of McLaren's pace, you look at him, he was in 5th for a lot of it, sort of tailing off the back of the top 4. And if you went off that race alone, and you could probably go, McLaren isn't that good, they're probably going to finish like 4th in the constructor standings. But then you look at what Oscar did in the first half of this race, and it was really like a very different story. And I think if McLaren can maximise that again in incoming races, I think they could easily pick up, several wins this season, because it seems to be with at least a lot of at least with both Mercedes engine cars, that being McLaren and Mercedes I am referring to, it seems to be that in dirty air, they kind of suck. They aren't very good, they're kind of slow, but once they're in free air, they are very comfortable and are able to easily control that. We saw that with Antonelli today, we saw that with Piastri today, we saw that with Russell in Australia, and we saw it with Antonelli in China. But it is very much, I think, out of everything, it's a very encouraging sign for McLaren that once they get their car started and working, and it hasn't crashed on the lap to the grid, and it hasn't killed itself from the inside out. They are very much capable of leading races and possibly winning them. Obviously, it's only round 3, but in races to come, I definitely think they are going to be very close to getting race wins. But, they controlled the pace, I think, as well as they could, and George couldn't get past. He made that one attempt on lap, I want to say 13 or 14, where he got past into the chicane. Simple enough move, and then Piastri got right back again because he was saving battery. So there was, across 22 laps or something roughly, George had one opportunity to pass. So I think Mercedes are going to be worried, to say the least, about McLaren's pace. But moving on, I think we're going to get into one of the big talking points for the race. And that is the safety car moment and Oliver Behrman's crash into the wall at Spoon Curve. But we're going to start with the effects of the safety car, and this is kind of what won Antonelli the race. It's nothing to take away from the fact that once the safety car was in, it was a good drive from Antonelli, but the safety car definitely put him in that position. Obviously, Piastri was the first to pull the trigger on pitting in the top 4, which honestly surprised me. I honestly thought that McLaren were going to wait for Mercedes to pull the trigger with Russell and come into the pits first, and then McLaren would have boxed a lap later. So it was actually a refreshing surprise to see McLaren go first with the race leader, which was very interesting. Obviously, and then Russell followed him in 3 laps later, which obviously, if you're Russell and Mercedes in that position, it's the obvious thing to do. You've seen the leader pit, so you want to get in really as soon as possible, but I can honestly see why they left. Instead of going in the lap after, they left it 3 laps just to see if the overcut was worth any sort of time. It wasn't in the end. That's just one of those things you make an error with. But they both pitted, and then not even a lap. Well, it was on the lap that George came out of the pits, and a safety car was called, which basically promoted Kimi Antonelli to a free pit stop from P1, Hamilton P2, and Gasly in P3. And we'll get onto that later, but there was a safety car period where Gasly was in 3rd, and my prediction was so on for Gasly P3. But that is for later in this episode. But promoted Antonelli to P1. From there, he kind of had it wrapped up, but once again, you look at wins like Norris Miami 2024, those kinds of races where you do get promoted to P1 because of just a lucky coincidence with the safety car. It's nothing to take away from the driver, but they are good when those things happen, and you got to make the most of it when they do, and Kimi 100% made the most of that. But now we will talk about the crash. God, pardon me, I am yawning a lot at the moment. But we're going to talk about Behrman's crash, and this has caused the most uproar from the race. Obviously, Behrman behind Colapinto going into Spoon. The closing distance, I did the maths. The closing distance was 92 kilometers an hour. If that was qualifying and Colapinto was on a cool-down lap and or out lap, it could probably be excusable. But the fact that Colapinto is also pushing at racing speed and the closing distance is that much, quite frankly, is not on. The incident, while at the end of the day from a racing perspective is on Colapinto, he did not need to sort of move to the middle of the track sort of as he did. I just do not think he saw Behrman coming that quickly, because Behrman is doing 270 kilometers an hour. Colapinto is doing about 190-ish, and Colapinto he goes through the corner, little move to the middle of the track, and Behrman reacts, goes left, and then gets on the grass, and there's your correction moment, and around you go off into the wall. So I honestly don't think you can blame Colapinto in terms of giving him a penalty, because I think he was just unsighted with Behrman coming that fast, and obviously Behrman couldn't have done anything. Once he commits left, the only place you're going to end up at that speed and at that trajectory is onto the grass, so there's nothing he could have done. But it raises a lot of issues around the power units, and especially the 50-50 sort of battery to ICE like ratio they've got going on at the moment. Because, we had, so many drivers warning us and warning the FIA that this might happen. You had Perez, Sainz, Albon, Ao Komatsu, Ocon, Alonso, Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, to name a few, warning the FIA about the potentially dangerous nature of these closing speeds and the battery recharge. The FIA very much dug their head in the sand about the issue and just tried to pretend it didn't exist to just essentially cover it up. But it happened. It took 3 races for it to happen. Obviously, we saw Behrman limping out of the car when it did happen. He's obviously been medically cleared now, so he is okay. But that is the problem with the FIA. It took them for the incident that was warned about to happen for them to do any sort of action against it. They did release a statement a few hours after the race saying that they're going to have meetings in April about the charging and the closing speeds and all this kind of stuff. Whether that will be constructive or not, we have no idea. It probably won't be because it's the FIA, and it very much felt like a cover-our-ass statement, because in my 11 years of watching Formula 1, I have never seen the FIA release an official statement that quickly after an accident. So it suggests that they are very much flustered by what has happened, and they very much know that they messed up. But we're going to get into a question now from Mr. Cookie, Wooly. He says, thoughts on the regs after Ollie Behrman's crash. Now, I've been someone that has been very much right. I've been sort of praising the regs in terms of the racing they provide. Obviously, I haven't been impressed with all the super clipping in qualifying. That hasn't been desired, but I wasn't really aware, or didn't really take too much attention to some of the issues, especially regarding closing speeds. Obviously, we knew it was bad. I was more concerned with the race starts, especially if you remember back to Australia with Colapinto and Lawson, where Lawson failed to get off the line, and Colapinto, he missed him by millimeters. I was more concerned with that aspect of the closing speeds. It never really occurred to me that the closing speeds in the race, like what we saw today in Suzuka, was even an issue. But now that I've seen it, and things have to change, because having a collision on the grid because someone didn't go is bad enough. Having a collision at a closing speed of nearly 100 kilometers an hour, when the car isn't even managing, is pushing at full racing speed, is concerning, to say the least. So they are really going to have to wake up. I pray that these so-called meetings in April are productive, because they got to sort this shit out fast, because it's going down a very dangerous path, to say the least. But moving on a little bit further now to the rest of the race, and I'm being joined by a special guest now for the rest of this podcast. Say hello. Say hi. Hi. He says hi, everybody. But yeah, so moving on to the rest of the race, and I wanted to have a quick mention about the pace of Mercedes and McLaren. I briefly skimmed over this earlier. I can't remember what point I was making. But earlier I mentioned how when George was behind Piastri, he couldn't really get past. And that sort of ties into what I'm going to talk about. But I've noticed that Mercedes and McLaren seem to work a lot better when they are in free air. Obviously, when Piastri was out front, he had the pace to stay there. He had the pace to defend from Russell and from whoever else was behind. And then we saw it in Australia. Russell had the pace to defend from everyone who was behind him. Same with China with Antonelli. So it seems to be, and it is mainly, a Mercedes thing, but it seems to be that they have almost designed their car to work 40 million times better in clean air rather than behind a car. And it very much reminds me of the 2017 to 2020 period of Mercedes design, where they designed the car to be in free air because they were so confident in getting pole and leading the race from the get-go that they didn't design the car for battle or for Plan C, as the F1 movie affectionately named it. But it does lead to problems because they've quite clearly taken a direction to go with. Obviously, it works out nicely when either Mercedes is leading, obviously Australia, China. But when you have these situations where both Mercedes get absolutely mugged off the line down into turn one and then get trapped behind other cars, it doesn't work as well. It's not as quick. We saw it today. You know, they were struggling to get past McLaren up front, and when Antonelli dropped back into 6th place, obviously he managed to clear Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris with relative ease, but from there he was very much stuck between a rock and a hard place where he couldn't really gain any more places. So it's an interesting thing to think about for the rest of the season, that, you know, if Mercedes do get bogged down off the line, it does set them up for failure for the rest of the Grand Prix, purely because it seems to be that Mercedes works a hell of a lot better in clean air. But moving on to the final point in this podcast, and it's something I wanted to talk about essentially from qualifying, but we're going to continue it on. But it is Verstappen not being able to get past Pierre Gasly. Obviously, I mentioned before how Max couldn't out qualify him. It's 4-0 in qualifying now, but the fact that he couldn't even get past him over a race distance, well, obviously he wasn't behind him from the get-go. He had to pass Hadjar with Team Orders, it looked like, but that's a story for another time. Had to get past Lindblad as well before he got to Gasly. But there was that period of 43 laps, give or take a little bit, where he was stuck behind that Alpine, and it suggests that Red Bull is even worse in race trim than it is in qualifying trim. Obviously, you know, normally Max is quite good at passing another car. You know, you just send it up the inside, through you go. But the fact that he couldn't even get past the Alpine suggests that that Red Bull is even worse in the race than it is in qualifying. Because being bad in qualifying is one thing, but then when you're stalling on the grid like Max does, get stuck behind an Alpine for an entire race, you know, it doesn't look good. It makes for grim reading. Okie dokie, and then for the final section of this video, as always, we are going to end off with a quick reflection on the predictions. So I'm just going to bring them up now.
Hello, viewers.
And, oh, hello, listen to me. I sound so good. Go back a bit, back a bit, back a bit, back a bit more, back a bit more, back a bit more, back a bit more. I think that looks about right. Yes, sir. So, what did we say? Standout team, I said Ferrari. No, you can't really claim that. They had an okay weekend. Not spectacular. McLaren were definitely better than Ferrari were this weekend, so I'm not going to claim that as a prediction. As we know, we've got 9 points on offer, I believe. Standout team, standout driver, pole, P5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Crazy prediction and Destructors champion. So 10 points on offer for these predictions. So standout driver, standout team, we did not have that one come in. We did not go, or I am not going to try and claim Ferrari there. Standout driver, I went for Pierre Gasly, and every day of the week I am taking that prediction. Thank you, yes, please. Out-qualified both Red Bulls, qualified in the top 7, finished 7th, kept Verstappen behind him for the whole race. I think that is a pretty solid prediction there for standout driver. Definitely going to take that. We are 1 for 2 for this week. I think this is our best yet. Pole position. I went for Lewis Hamilton. Nope. Next. P5. I went for Antonelli. Next. P4. I went for Charles Leclerc. Even worse. I am not having a good run this week. P3. I went for Pierre Gasly. Nah, I think I was a little bit too confident with my prediction in Pierre. So P3 didn't come in. So what is that? We are now at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We are now 1 for 6. Still better than we've been doing in other weeks. P2. I went for George Russell. Another big fat 0 for me there. And then P1, I went for Lewis Hamilton, which is the biggest of, I think, the season so far. That was highly unideal. But, that is the positions. So we are at 1, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We are at 1 for 8. Our Destructors champion, I said Sergio Perez. Now, if you had counted this prediction for only practice, you could claim this because Perez did actually crash into Albon. So, this very nearly came in. But then Behrman had to go and have a 90 kilometers an hour closing distance on Colapinto and take the Destructors champion there. So, we're not going to get that prediction, unfortunately. And then the final prediction for the Japanese predictions that we made at the beginning of the week, I said that both Alpines finish in the top 6. Did that happen? It did not. Gasly did finish 7th, so I was nearly there. Colapinto finished, I think, 13th. So not ideal. We're 1 for 6. Also, we're 1 for 10 this week. But that one I will definitely take. That was a very nice prediction. But that is going to be it. But that is going to do it for this video, everybody. Sorry it was a little bit shorter. I know we didn't cover as much as I think I probably should have. I'm a bit tight for time. Got a few things to do this evening. Got assessments to work on. All that kind of lovely stuff. So apologies that this weekend review was a little bit shorter. But hopefully you can all excuse me for my poor work. But that's going to do it for this video, everybody. Hopefully you all enjoyed. Stay safe, have an awesome day, make awesome choices. I am going to try and get streams back up and running soon. We've had internet problems, all that kind of stuff, and OBS is being a bitch. But, yes, that is going to be it for me. Stay safe, have an awesome day, make awesome choices. I'm going to see you all later. Bye-bye.